check out Cajun Lights, your complete dog hunting outfitter. Tracking equipment, leashes, collars, dog supplies, and much, much more. You can find it all at CajunLights.com. And don't forget their outstanding lineup of lights. You can find it all at CajunLights.com. Elite nutrition products are the hottest thing on the market right now for dog and horse owners. And Houndsman XP is a dealer. You can find all their products on our website at houndsmanxp.com. Over the past 5 years, you've tuned into this podcast, and I don't take it lightly. We have built a mutual trust. And when I recommend a product, it's because I believe in it, I use it, and I'm given my seal of approval for that. I'm putting my name on that. And with Elite Nutrition products, I do trust it. I do use it. I've seen great results with their essential dogs, their pre and probiotics, their tick-borne disease treatment. It's all natural. It's a great alternative to pharmaceuticals when used appropriately. If you expect extreme performance, you need Elite Nutrition. Available from houndsmanxp.com.
Hey everyone, I want to let you know about a new sponsor of the podcast being Johnson Quail, and for nearly 30 years they've produced premium Coturnix quail for falconers across the U.S. and Alaska. They're a small family-owned business trusted by the Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Zoo, and the Cornell Raptor Program. I've now used these quail to feed my own birds, and they're pretty nice size, and they're aged around 35 to 37 days and around 8 ounces per bird. So they're nice, good quality birds, and they are fed with custom formulated feed and frozen with dry ice and packed well for shipment. So whether you need 60 birds or 6,000, they've got you covered. If you want to put in an order, call Kevin at 507-213-9005 or go to johnsonquail.com. And if you use the promo code Chronicles, you get 10% off your first order. Johnson Quail, trusted since 1995. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for what's probably the last episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast. I had hoped to avoid this, but unfortunately, due to a lack of overall response and really no solution presenting itself to keep me from having to fund this pretty much solely out of my own pocket for the most part, I'm going to have to hang things up and go ahead and put this on the shelf along with a lot of my own falconry endeavors for the time being. I have unfortunately rehomed pretty much most of my birds at this point and might even have to rehome my dogs, and I'm just in the process of making sure that moving forward, I am in a position to be financially sound again, and I really just want to make sure that if any other emergencies come up and life happens, I want to make sure that I'm in a position to avoid financial disaster and really just need to focus on myself and take care of things for a while. So whenever I miss falconry again, I'm sure I will pick it back up, but unless an opportunity comes along for the podcast to become self-sustaining or more people want to help support it, this is probably going to be my last episode indefinitely and possibly forever. But I wanted to make sure that if this was going to be my last episode that I published for you all, that I was going to go out on the best note possible. And so that being said, I made arrangements a while back and carved out a little bit of money to be able to head down to the snipe meet down in Arkansas. And while I was down there, I got a chance to meet back up with Dr. Ken Riddle again, and we got a chance to record the different things that he wanted to clarify and kind of summarize better from the last episode that we did. And he also wanted to expound on a lot of other things, tell a few more stories, and just get a few more things down for posterity's sake. So I really am glad that I had a chance to make this happen still. It was another 3 hours well spent to make sure that these recollections and different things that Ken wanted to get down were going to be preserved forever. So I really hope that you all have enjoyed this production over the last 7 years. It's been a big sense of purpose and fulfillment for me to be able to contribute and give back to this community, and I really hope that it's been a worthwhile contribution, and current and future generations of falconers will be able to get something out of it for years to come. So without rambling on anymore, I'll just say that I'll miss this, and thank you all so much for the support over the years, especially those of you that have helped make so many of these episodes happen. I will forever appreciate it. And with that, I give you this follow-up 3-hour episode with Dr. Ken Riddle. Thank you all for listening, and here we go. All right, well, we've got another rainy morning down here in Arkansas, and at least, though, the last 2 days, we got to see some cool flights. We got to see some good stuff at the snipe meet down here, and while I was down here, I wanted to take this opportunity to go ahead and record this follow-up episode with Ken Riddle this morning, because there was definitely some things after that first recording that Ken wanted to shore up and clarify and kind of elaborate on just a little bit more. And it was as good a time as any, I guess, after seeing some good flights from Dan Murray's Stinger and Bond's Falcon as well.
Yeah,
and,
great flights.
Yeah, great flights. So we got a chance to catch up a little bit and talk in the truck on the way to hunts and things, and I'm glad we got a chance to make this work this morning.
Yeah, we sure did. I enjoyed it. Actually, I really enjoyed the flights and getting out and seeing some falconry again. It's been a year since I've seen a bird even, and so it was really great. Nice.
Well, yeah, scratching the itch is always a good thing, especially whenever you've missed it. So
you bet.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Let's just go ahead and jump right in here, Ken. I know we wanted to start this off by you going ahead and clarifying some points and things that you felt like you needed to make sure to get right from the first recording. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, and you go ahead and elaborate on what you feel like you need to elaborate on.
Okay. So there were, the last podcast, if you listen to it, you'll realize that it was a really lengthy one, and it's difficult to pry back into the old days, like in the 1950s and 60s to get some of the details correct and in the right order. So, and I hurried up actually at the end of the last podcast, trying to finish through the list of things that I had, and actually forgot some of the things. Even when John had asked me, well, do you have anything else to say? I was so in a hurry to get done, I didn't even look to see if I had some, so I want to go back and cover them. And then I thought of a few other things that tie into some of my other experiences. And so one of those is a story I mentioned that Tom Smiley had given me a Cooper's Hawk back in the early 60s. I think it was 61. And so Cooper's Hawks were my passion to begin with. I mean, I was inspired by an article in Outdoor Life magazine where an artist did a really nice painting it was a color painting of a hunter dressed up in hunting gear and with a Cooper's Hawk, female adult, in a tail chase with its feet out and almost catching a bobwhite quail. So that really inspired me early on. That was back in the early 50s. And so me and a friend of mine, a good friend, a school boyfriend, and then a band friend, Chuck Blackwell, who became a world famous drummer, we both hunted for Cooper's Hawks for 5 years. And we never saw one. And finally one day, Chuck found a molted tail feather from probably a female Cooper's Hawk. But that was it. And so I was really discouraged because, I mean, I knew that they were Oklahoma native birds. And my dad was a farmer, and I talked to him about, his experiences and was questioning him all the time about Cooper's hawks. Well, he called them blue darters, and he was very familiar with them. He said, yeah, the blue darters were everywhere. I mean, they were on the farm. He said they were, you didn't see them that much, but when you did, they would be out after quail or swooping in our yard and taking young chickens because they, farmers raised young chickens all the time. But so I was really perplexed, and I never figured it out until later on. I became aware of the fact that they had suffered a population crash like the peregrines due to the DDT poisoning. And now they're everywhere here. But over the years, I was never lucky enough to get one until Tom gave me that one. So that was in 1961, and it was an eyas out of the nest, and I raised it in a muse. I fed it through a feed chute on the door, and kept it until it was long after hard pinned. But anyway, I trained the bird and caught quail, pheasants, and small birds, rabbits, and small birds with it. So at the end of the year, I got temporary duty assignment in Germany to do some more education in my medicine. I was a medic in the Air Force. And so before I left, I called Fred Castor, my mentor in Tulsa, and asked him if he would molt the bird for me. And so this was early on, and Fred Castor was a very progressive, thinking out of the box type falconer, and they made beautiful bells and hoods. But anyway, his chambers, I wanted to describe a little bit. They were two chambers side by side, and the dividing partition was a barred window, and he could open a door on hinges to open the barred window so that a tiercel on one side and a falcon on the other could become acquainted with each other. And then he would eventually then open the chamber up and let the birds fly together. At the back of his chamber, he had a nest ledge that went all the way across the back, and above that was another small barred window that also on hinges. And the bird would set up there, and catch breezes, a good cross current of the air in the chamber. But anyway, he told me that he had a great racing homer pigeon loft. I mean, really fancy and well managed. But he said that the reason for that window on hinges up there is that he would, if they raised young in there, he would just open the window and let the parents fly in and out and take care of them. Of course, that never happened, but anyway, that was the setup. So I left and went to Germany, and I had already worked with, or had already corresponded with some German falconers before I got there. And so soon after I was there, I think within probably the first 2 weeks, I started getting invitations to meet with them in the parking lot and go somewhere on the weekend. So I pleaded with my head of section, and he let me take some weekend passes, to leave. So we traveled all over the country and with different falconers, and met a number of them. Dr. Bragg, a real famous thoracic surgeon. And then eventually I met Renz Waller, a famous artist naturalist and falconer. I think it was in Dusseldorf is where he lived, and he invited me to come up and spend some time with him, and so I did. So I took a train ride that time and went to visit this man. He was probably in his 70s at least, and his house was like a veritable museum. He had been associated with the Reichsfalkenhof, which was associated with Hitler in some way. They had eagles and falcons, some kind of outfit. But anyway, his house was unreal. He had like chainmail and complete military metal uniforms there, standing around his house, and all kinds of implements on the wall and beautiful pictures and so forth. But anyway, in the afternoon, we didn't really have much conversation because he didn't speak much English, but he would direct me to the back of his house when he would get ready to fly his bird, and he would pick up his hawking bag and a glove and walk outside in the backyard. And he had a lanner falcon sitting on a block there, and then back behind at the back of his yard were open molting chambers the whole front of the chamber was like 7 feet tall, and it was all vertical, bars like you would usually use in a muse. But anyway, he'd pick up the bird, which was beating its wings as he walked over there, and stand in the middle of the yard. And I don't think he ever picked up of one foot or the other one. I mean, it's like a statue. He would stand there and cast the bird off. Well, on each side of the yard, there was a big hedgerow, like arborvitae or something, a solid wall of greenery. And the bird would immediately fly to the far end of the yard and pop up over the top of it and disappear. And wrens would be standing in the middle of the yard just swinging his lure in vertical circles, over and over and over again. And then suddenly the bird would pop up over the top and come down and make a pass and go across the yard and disappear again over and over, about 20 times, I think. So he did this every day. So he discussed that bird in some way having to do with probably it was a type of lanner falcon, but he referred to it as an alfinetti, which I did some research later on. It looked like they were maybe European lanners that come somewhere from maybe around Italy. But anyway, the whole thing kind of gave me a different inside look at falconry being done in different ways. I said, well, okay, there's different ways to do things that you might not even consider, so you need to kind of open up your mind and get away from rote information, So that was important. So I left then at the end of 6 months and went back to pick up Butcher Boy, my Cooper's hawk. Fred Castor owned an aerial exploration company, and he was out on a flying job somewhere. And his wife, Helen, though, was home. But when I got there, I ran over to the mews to look in through the barred window to see my bird. And I looked in there, and I kept craning and looking up, down, and I couldn't see anything from there. So I went to the house and talked to Helen. She said, well, I know he's in there because I fed him yesterday. He was there, So she went out there with me. We opened the door and went in, and he wasn't in there. And then I looked up at the top over that nest ledge, and the window was open for some reason. Somehow or other, I don't know, just maybe the wind blew it open or what, I don't know. But anyway, the bird was gone. And I was just decimated. I said, well, God, he's gone. There's no finding that bird, or if I did, he wouldn't come to me. So anyway, she encouraged me to go out behind his house. He had like 5 lakes back there and about 40 acres. And I trained the bird to whistle. So I would whistle, hold up my hand, and then I'd pull out the lure. And although I didn't fly him that much, the lures, he was trained to my fist really well. And, he would fly up ahead of me and wait for me to flush stuff and come back and light on my hand. It was really a great experience. But anyway, I had no hope of finding him. I got to the back lake, and there were some big trees back there. I think they were pecan trees because it was that kind of habitat. And held up my hand and whistled, I guess maybe like one more time. And I noticed a small bird up in the tree suddenly just took off and came right towards me and came in and landed on my hand. I couldn't believe it. It was Butcher Boy, and he still had the jesses on there, so I pinched down on them. And so I was looking at him. The first thing I saw was his legs were white. The skin was white. It should have been yellow. And then I looked up at him, and he was breathing rapidly or deeply, had labored breathing. So, and then I reached up and felt of his chest, and he was very thin. So the bird, I think I took it back to Fort Worth, but I think he lived about 4 or 5 days and then died, So I cut him open, and he had both air sacs were full of aspergillosis, big aspergilloma. But anyway, I thought some of those points were somewhat interesting, especially the fact that that bird came back after 6 months and amused, to the fist. I still find it hard to believe. But maybe that's the way Cooper's hawks are. I don't know, but I only had one. So another more general follow-up then was because of the fact that, I rushed some things. I wanted to go back, and I wrote some of them down, and I want to go back through to make sure that people understand correctly, because my point of doing these kind of things, and even in my book, there's no tall tales in there. I want to be an accurate kind of reporter, Anyway, so there's literally thousands of private falconers and mini shakes and lots of falcons. Hundreds of falcons in Abu Dhabi and around the Gulf. And the Abu Dhabi Falcon Research Hospital provided basically free service for everyone. So it's difficult for me to remember some of these details, and so as we talked about a few minutes ago, I wanted to try to get things accurately and placed in chronological order. Might mention here that I counted up in my passports, and I made between 52 and 56 international flights in my lifetime. So you can imagine, trying to put them in order. And sometimes I would go from here to Morocco, sometimes from here to Abu Dhabi, sometimes from here to London, or France, Anyway, so I'm not the kind of person that tends to focus on the past either. I had to reach down deep, and I even had to do some research in my archives, to get dates and places. Even looking at my first daughter's birthday to see, okay, how old is she and when was that? But anyway, I want to get some of these interesting things down pat. So I've actually written a list of things, and I have them recorded pretty well.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess this will be the first question then that I would have for you regarding, some of these different things that you wanted to clarify and get right and all that kind of stuff. But I know in the first podcast you mentioned, a special falcon that you wanted to highlight. And I guess this will be the first opportunity then to go ahead and elaborate a little bit more on that and clarify some points on that.
Okay.
Then, yeah.
All right. Well, I guess I also wanted to mention that there's some other really good stories and lots of valuable detailed information in my book, but unfortunately it's not available. It's out of print. But if you can get a hold of the book and you're interested in some things like bonding or lure flying, maybe you can get somebody to copy and send it to you. But anyway, so yeah, there was a really special falcon that hit my doorstep, so to speak, within about 3 to 4 months of my arrival in Abu Dhabi. I was a veterinarian taking over Sheikh Zayed, the president of the United Arab Emirates, taking over his falcons and building a falcon hospital. So the bird's name is Farhan, and in Arabic that means happy. And Farhan was a passage falcon. It was a fantastic falcon. The Pakistani trappers that I talked to from time to time referred to the bird as tiger, and the falconers in Abu Dhabi referred to them as Sinjari falconers. But anyway, Farhan came an object of concern to me when she returned critically ill from Sheikh Zayed's hunting trip in Morocco. And I was, just new there. I had almost no equipment, no medicines. Everything was in the sea, headed that way. But anyway, Farhan's life story is iconic in many ways, and not to mention the fact that Sheikh Zayed told me personally that she was the best of 200 of his best falcons that he ever had. So that was pretty special. So today I want to use her story, like you said, to encapsulate and bring together some of these important pieces of information, especially the epic centuries-old practice of falconry in Abu Dhabi and the rapid changes that I witnessed there over the 30 years or so that I was there. Sheikh Zayed fostered an amazing world-class practice of falconry. It's an art that's passed down to an entire nation of people, a veritable cultural heritage unlike any other. It's especially interesting that falconry and falcons themselves raised to a high level of importance to the entire population. I mean, it's not just a passing hobby or something, you know.
Well, is this a point where I can ask a quick question, you think?
For sure.
Okay. I'm just curious. I know he said he had, like, over the course of his time in falconry, like 200 something birds. Like, on average, like, how many raptors did these different folks have on average?
Well, I don't know about on average, but I mean, some of the younger sheikhs and Sheikh Safar would have maybe 25 to 40 or so. But some of the people, like the rulers in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, had a lot more. I saw His Highness one time. We bought 102 falcons at one point. I mean, we looked at all of them. He took the whole lot. But when I got there, I'll mention that again if I haven't already before. I think there were around 300 and let's say 30 falcons in the mews when I first got there, but they weren't all, permanent residents there. Some were there for breeding, and some for giving for gifts, and some were spotter falcons, really, really fantastic birds that they might save, and some of them they would use every year. But I mean, large numbers of falcons we're talking about.
Oh, sure. Well, I was just curious on average.
Yeah.
So go ahead, continue.
Okay, so this brings up this point now. So I'm not sure where Farhan was housed before I came to Abu Dhabi. Sheikh Zayed had a special mews where he kept all of his very special spotter falcons that he would use, pretty routinely. But then there are other really magnificent mews, big ones, sand-covered floors and wind towers for ventilation and so forth, where he would keep birds for gifts and birds for release, because releasing falcons in the spring was a big deal. So every spring we'd haul out, 30 to 50 or 75 falcons and release them. And one year we did that close to the Falcon Hospital. And but I think that was the last year, because from then on, His Highness instigated a real formal falcon release program where they would take falcons from everywhere, and they would all go to points beyond, for release in other countries. But I probably should mention here, in case you didn't see the first podcast, that although Farhan was gravely ill, she survived in spite of fumbling around with the treatment and not knowing exactly what the problem was. So I'm pretty sure that Farhan's explosive nature would have guaranteed her use as a hunter and not a spotter falcon, because when she was unhooded, she would have immediately blasted off the fist looking for something, the target, let's say. If she was molted in the huge flight pen that he had at the palace, she would have had some flying ability through the summer, even though it would have been hot weather. But she did fly, from time to time, morning and sometimes evening. Anyway, some of the falconers would long lure their intermewed falcons over very, very lengthy distance, a couple of hundred, up to maybe a half a kilometer, meters away, to prepare them physically. I also saw falconers driving across the desert in Land Rovers, trailing a lure from the window to exercise their falcons, presumably the Janus falcon or intermewed adults. older falcons weren't commonly used as primary hunters because mainly, number one, they were not that good at conditioning birds for endurance, and but mainly because they love to start a new falcon every year, a new challenge, a new problems, and to increase their expertise in manning and taming, and then whatever, And they're pretty fast at training them, so it wasn't the kind of labor-intensive thing like a captive raised bird is. Easy, 20 days or less. So every falconer, though, that hunted habar would want an intermewed falcon as a spotter. And that's really due to the fact that habar are very camouflaged birds in the desert, sand and rocks and brush, and also their propensity to run way ahead rather than to fly, to just run way ahead of any disturbance in the desert, And so, although our eyesights are pretty good and we have binoculars, a spotter falcon could see them, unbelievably long distances. So when they're running far ahead like that or moving through the brush, the only thing you can see is the top part of their neck and the head moving level through the brush, which is, also doesn't create a target very quickly, for the guy that's hunting for it. So we use these trained spotters to ride in the car. They would ride unhooded. They always picked very tame, docile, totally manned and tamed birds for this kind of technique. But they would ride in the car between the two front seats, or a guy could hold them up on top of the sunroof and let them look, or they sometimes would hood them though and let them ride along hooded until they saw something that of interest, and we would stop and searching those local areas, and then sometimes drive up on top of buttes and in the car and let them see for a whole vista of desert below. But anyway, we'd sit there perfectly still and watch the falcon's eyes and the fine filiplumes or rictal bristles that are found around the eyes and nares, of falcons and raptors. So I would sit there and watch them, and so did other people. I mean, when they saw habara, those bristles would point forward just like rigid antennas, and they would get this really hard focused look in their eye. It was hard to describe unless you were just looking at it and think, oh, this is different. But anyway, then they would a lot of times just take off on their own, fly out the window, and they would get a flight on a habar that was running, and sometimes the falcon would miss the first time, the bird would dodge it and then take off flying so they could get tail chases too. But they would at least know where the habar were, because they would be in a different location, other habar in the same area. And so you would get multiple flights from one group, by using other falcons. So that's why they like the spotters.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating stuff. I don't know have very many people that would think to do. We always trust our eyes, but it seems like with spotting things instead of our birds here, So I don't know of very many falconers that would use that here, as opposed to to over there. So
I doubt if there are any. I mean, there could be, but I mean, they would be really good if you're hunting pheasant, for instance.
Yeah.
Something that runs on the ground. I mean, that's, if you have to, again, like I said, you always pick these ones that are very stoic, steady, tame birds,
Sure. Sure.
but certainly would be very useful.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess then, I mean, would this be a good time then to ask what happened to Farhan after that illness? Was she able to hunt or?
Sure. Well, at least she, like I told you, she survived. She was completely well. And over the next several years, I would see her being carried by a falconer around the camp. But interestingly, I never saw her in any active hunting parties. A young falconer or somebody would have her, and they would be training her on the crayons. And that was interesting to me because, obviously I had a close association with the bird, and I was interested in what was happening with it. So one year I helped this young falconer. He was actually, his job was in the signal group. In other words, they had radio contact with Abu Dhabi and other places, and that was his job to do that. But His Highness liked to give falcons to people that he liked, and he loved falconry so much that he thought everybody should love it just like him, So anyway, he had this bird, and so I helped him. I came up, he spoke good English, and I came up and asked him if I could help him train his bird, and I did. So Farhan was very quiet and, well-mannered on the block, but as soon as you picked it up and the bird thought that you were getting ready to do something like train it or fly it, she would start leaping frantically on the glove at the jesses. The jesses held up tight, just lunging forward over and over and over again, And so as soon as you unhooded her, she would just blast off, maybe in whatever direction you happen to be standing, looking, and she would take off in that direction. Then she would whirl and find the intended target and then respond quickly. But anyway, it was that kind of a bird. You could say hybrid vigor for sure, but try as I might, I tried to get him I said, take her off the crayons, the bird is ready to go, but he never did. In fact, he told me that he was just afraid he would lose her, and that would have been bad news, if you lost the president's favorite bird. But anyway, I'm thinking this kind of reminds me of some of the intermewed falcons that I saw and hunted with some of these old Bedouin falconers. With them, it was usually very, very limited English or whatever, or just gestures and so forth. But I remember several times they told me, "Doctor, don't say the word habara. If you do, the falcon's going to hear it and start leaping off of the perch here, or, trying to take off even with the hood on." So he'd tell me, just to point or say something else, but don't use that word. And I saw that happen a number of times. Somebody would say habara, and the bird, picked up, and then it was getting ready to open the wings and that sort of thing. So, and people didn't, they hated to see a bird do anything like try to fly or be disrespectful in the car. They had to be very steady and so forth. So my job was, in all the time, they always gave me the passenger seat in front. So later on, not earlier, but anyway, my job would be to maintain a normalcy in the falcon that was sitting next to me. If it opened the wings, I would do something to distract it and try to put the wings back together and all this stuff. Anyway, that was the thing I had thought about that was related to behavior. But anyway, one day I was lure flying Nahar. It was a very white Saker falcon that His Highness had gifted me earlier. I named her Snowflake just for the benefit of the kids, and I called her Snowflake, and they still remember that bird as being named Snowflake. But anyway, I was giving her some interval training exercises. The hunters were gone that day, and the camp was quiet, so it gave me time to do that, and the bird was already in very fit condition. I'm pretty sure with her, I usually stooped her up to about 100 times morning, and sometimes 50 or 75 late evening if I was out in the desert. So she was fit. But anyway, I was always hopeful that His Highness would tell me to go hunting, and he did every year. I mean, every year he would say, okay, go hunting this week with a certain shake, And so it wasn't a matter of if I was going to, it's just when I wanted to have her ready. Anyway, during that exercise to the lure, I noticed an Arab walking some distance watching me, and then he stopped in the shade and just watched the rest of the training. It turned out it was one of the administrators from the private department of His Highness, and I knew him from other administrative needs and interactions. So anyway, he came up to talk to me at the end of the flight. When I finished, he was very impressed with the bird's ability. In fact, he said, "Doctor, this was impressive. Why don't you fly the bird for His Highness?" And then immediately I, recoiled back. I mean, that's the kind of person I was. I mean, I wouldn't have leaped forward. I said, no, there's no way I can do that because I don't want the focus on me. I'm just here to serve the people and take care of their sick falcons, and plus the camp was full of native falconers, and I didn't want to be the stand out at all. I wanted to be on their good side. But anyway, I said, no, I couldn't. But then he persisted in his questions and so forth, and his train of thought. He said, well, I think His Highness would like it. He said, I'm going to go ahead and talk to him and see if we can set it up for you. And I'm thinking this Thursday would be a perfect time because, Fridays were a holy day. And I mean, that's why I think he asked for Thursday. And he said, when His Highness leaves the Majlis and exits the sheltered enclosure to get in his car, just yell loudly for your Indian technician to release her. And he said, be ready. And then he turned and walked off, leaving me with those thoughts. So the first thing was, I couldn't refuse now. Because the guy was asking His Highness for permission for me to fly the bird. And so it was going to happen in 3 days. So as I thought about it, the important thing to me was that Sheikh Zayed would either approve it or not. And if he did, then it would be an expected event. So I had to prepare, this man was serious. So,
well, how did it end up going?
Well, it was, it was like being on stage front and center. But in Oklahoma, I had already incorporated short rest periods with my peregrine that seemed really beneficial when I was hunting ducks and prairie chickens on occasional weekends. They were forced rest for the falcon, and of course I was in a really heavy academic load in veterinary school, so I had to keep my head to the grindstone. But I learned that on those off days, with a falcon that was already in fit condition, like a passage bird would be, that it would supercharge the bird's desire to fly and release some pent-up energy. So if I rested the bird 5 days in a row and then gave it maybe interval training with lure exercises on the weekends, that maybe Sunday afternoon or even Sunday morning, sometimes it was, ready to go. It was perked up and ready to hunt. So anyway, with that in mind, I sat in the har on a Majlis perch in the hospital tent and left her there at complete rest, and I only gave her measured amount of food every day, unhooded her and then hooded her back. So Thursday arrived with a gray sky and 25 to 30, probably 35 to 40 kilometer an hour wind, and blowing sand across the desert in a gray sky, So dressed in Arab dress, I hunkered down in the shelter of a caravan trailer and watched the Majlis tent like a hawk. When I saw His Highness's entourage leave the Majlis, I ran out into a large sand flat and waited. So when His Highness exited the brush-enclosed perimeter, I yelled a familiar Arab falconer's call, and my technician released from the tent door about 100 meters away. She streaked into the wind across the expanse of sand and threw up sharply in the north wind, and then turned and targeted me in a swift flyby. At that moment, I glanced toward the Majlis, and I saw His Highness and the group of falconers standing in the blowing sand near their hunting cars watching. For the next 5 minutes or so, I gave her 30 stoops in the stiff wind with sharp, impressive throw-ups and long outruns. On the last throw-up, she caught the wind just right, executed an aerial flip, and passed downwind, and then back up to take the lure in the air and settle to the sand. I glanced briefly at the Majlis again as I managed Nahar on the lure to see His Highness walk to his car. He was signaling his approval with the salute in the air of his camel stick. The weather and conditions had been just right for an impressive aerial display, and Nahar was already a naturally impressive falcon to the lure, especially the fact that she was white, but also her style was just one of those kind. Her flying weight, by the way, was 1 kilo. A year or two later, and again on a hunt in Pakistan, His Highness called me to the Majlis. This is getting back to Farhan. In a few brief moments, and with some clarification from the Chamberlain of the Presidential Court, His Highness asked me to take Farhan and train her for the hunt, and to be ready in 10 days. I don't remember what else he said that day, as I was totally blown away as I walked away from the tent with Farhan on my mangala being like the Arab cuff. It was shocking, really. I mean, to be carrying the bird, knowing that I was going to not only train it and exercise it, but to hunt it. I mean, it was shocking. So I was optimistic though and excited. I mean, here's the plan. I mean, my primary drive for the whole time was to help wherever I could the sport of falconry. So I knew that the fact that we talked about, I think in the first podcast, where hybrids and captive raised birds, all of them were considered to be trash, basically, because they couldn't train them and get them to hunt, couldn't condition them, and in some cases couldn't train them either, but they were just strange birds. So I was optimistic that here's, my first chance to demonstrate something that would really have an impact on the important person in the whole country. As I neared my tent, though, I mean, reality really quickly set in. I only had 10 days to work with the bird. And so I had to come up with a plan, and that's what I do anytime I'm flying my bird. I mean, I always have a plan going forward for the day or the week or whatever. I mean, I stick with it, and then I analyze it later to see what was wrong, if there was something wrong with my plan. But I always kind of choreograph my flights. But anyway, I thought long and hard about the conditioning period and what I could do with that bird based on what I already knew. So, I thought, well, maybe she had some stamina from flying in the flight pen and these sort of things, or maybe she had been trained. I hadn't seen her that particular year with anybody. So anyway, I had this plan. So the first day, the next morning, actually, because that was the afternoon, he called me there. The first morning I went out and I flew her to the lure and let her catch it in the air, and I gave her a small reward. Did a few catch-ups like that in the air. Then in the afternoon, I repeated those exercises with several more sessions. Again, broken up into short interval periods, like basically a flight and catch and come down. And I think I passed her a time or two to the lure. I don't remember. But anyway, with the experience that first day, I mean, I was here. This was what I wanted. I mean, she was attacking the lure and catching it in the air. So I formulated this plan of daily free flights with multiple interval sessions, as many as I could cram in the morning and the good weather, and again in the afternoon. So they're gradually increasing numbers of passes each time, and like I always do, I mean, I watched her like a hawk for wing beat and open mouth breathing and these sort of things. And my interval periods on these these are like wind sprint conditions and periods. So I'd give her like 5 minutes rest, and then with a couple of bites of food, and then again, the same thing over again, same thing, but maybe more stoops the second time. And then the third time I would give her all they could take, but always watching and stopping before it got out of control. You know, you can do too many. But the method, it tends to, I mean, you want it to fly the bird's wings off, I call it. I mean, you want to see the butts of the wings hanging down at the bird's side at the end of your exercise, and you know you gave it what you wanted. But anyway, I did this 3 to 5 times in the a day, you know, before noon. So I guess I'll mention here that this was surprising to people. I mean, even like this on this trip, I talked to one person who was a little bit surprised. I mean, that a lot of falconers will raise their eyebrows if you said, well, I flew it 3 times, you know, to the lure. But I mean, it totally amazed me that, I mean, one person I met, I mean, a lifelong friend of mine, well-known falconer, came to me one day and he said, Ken, I read your book, and in that book it says something about your doing these 3, typically mine are 3 interval sessions of, you know, 5-minute breaks between, and then stooping the heck out of them and get them all they can take each time. He said, you're really flying the bird 3 times like that? I said, well, yes. And he said, that's hard to believe. I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I fly it maybe 100 yards, and I'll give it some lure passes, then I feed it up and go home. I said, well, look, no, this is... So, you know, I've calculated the distance you can get in each one of these lure flying sessions. And let's say different birds have different styles, but some of them are 50 meters, some of them are 100, or maybe even more meters per stoop. So if you do, you know, like 3 sessions and a good amount of stooping, I mean, you can get, you know, like 5 kilometers or something out of one session. You compare that to one flight of 1 minute, you know, 100 yards, and there's a total difference. And I brought that element of training into our group, and I mean, it was amazing. I mean, I had a really good story about that process one time where it actually embarrassed the head falconer because that technique was way better than his, you know. But anyway, so that's what I did with Farhan. So when the 10th day rolled around, her fitness had really improved to the point that I was encouraged. I thought, well, you know, I think she's good enough to go. Like, she'd probably take maybe 800-meter tail chase and nail one in the air, or for sure that, you know, the way Habara will evade falcons a lot of time, puts them down on the ground and they will fight, you know. So I was pretty sure she would catch one, unless it was one of these big males that would take off and gain altitude and try to outfly, especially if it was a long ways off. So anyway, by the way, I've checked her fitness by feeling across the pectoral muscles with the thumb and middle finger. And what you do there is at mid-chest is to feel the tension of the lateral aspect of the pectoral muscles. And if a bird is slack, in other words, if it's not fit, the contour of the pectoral muscles will be hourglass shaped and soft when you kind of touch it back and forth, or press it back and forth between your thumb and middle finger. But if it's fit, it will be straight and taut like a guitar string or something. So anyway, I evaluated her, and she had pretty good fitness, I thought, and certainly the weight was perfect.
Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
So is that to kind of gauge fitness and, like how good a bird's muscled up? Like, I mean, is that pretty much universal across all birds of prey? I mean, can you use that for hawks and everything else?
Oh,
too?
yeah, for sure.
Might be a silly question, but I'm just curious. I just want to make sure that, there's plenty of people that don't fly falcons, that also mainly just fly hawks and stuff. And
well, this again, my questions and answers are always going to be accurate. So I haven't flown that many red tails, and it was way back in the back. So all of my experiences, almost all of it is on falcons, but I'm sure it would be true. I mean, to a certain extent, but I mean, I can't tell you, but I started feeling birds' pectoral muscles for fitness when I was with Steve Sherritt and Mike Brewer and a whole bunch of people in Oklahoma. They would always come to me and tell me to check my bird, and you think it's too high or too low or whatever, So I had lots of experience going way back. And this, by the way, is one way that Arabs also evaluate their fitness of their birds. And besides feeling the leg, I didn't really care that much for the leg myself, but you can determine something by feeling it. But that fitness test plus with the thumb and index finger, you can palpate. This is a very difficult and very sensitive kind of test, but you can determine the relative thickness of this adipose tissue, the subcutaneous fat under the skin, and that way will give you a fat index evaluation. So it can be done. I mean, in fact, I trained Arab falconers to do it. Some of them were really good at it, but it's another way of evaluating it. But anyway, that answers that question, I think.
Yeah.
So that morning, I carried Farhan to the hunting car that I had been assigned to accompany. We found a big group of habara that first day because the first time, because that last day of the hunt was always very special. It was almost like a party atmosphere. Everybody had their car loaded with falcons, and there would be lots of habara to fly. And sometimes you would see flights coming off first one car and then the other. We usually hunted in a big line with His Highness in the center somewhere, maybe 20 or 25 cars. And you'd see birds going in all kinds of directions. I mean, one would take off going one way and then another one another way. But it was very carefully controlled because, they didn't want to have a bird crabbing with another one. So you didn't fly two birds at the same habara. But anyway, our car found this big group, like we knew we would. And so the driver stopped and radioed His Highness, and he said, "We have a flight for Han and for the doctor." So then the radio echoed back an approval right away. His Highness is saying, "Okay, fly the bird." So we started moving ahead. And so I started trying to position myself to get ready. I had Farhan on my hand. But surprisingly, the other falconer in the car, who was standing up in the sunroof, just maintained his stance there and wouldn't let me get up. I mean, I kept trying to get up, and he would shove his self to the side and block me with his thigh, And so I was still struggling down in the seat trying to get up there. And then I looked up ahead, and I could see that all of a sudden the habara are flushing because we were pressing them pretty hard, and we had surprised them in some pretty thick brush. And so then this guy that's standing up in the sunroof started hollering, "Hand her up, hand Farhan up," And with the birds flying away, I mean, pretty soon I'm seeing them up like 300 or 400 or 500 meters away. And I had went, in desperation, handed her up so he could cast her off, but then he just stood there and held her hooded. I looked up through the sunroof, and there she was hooded on his hand. And I was saying, release the bird, release the bird. And he'd say, no, wait. Something like, no, it needs a long slip or something. But anyway, he spoke perfect English. But anyway, when he finally hooded her off, she blasted off the fist in an impressive tail chase out to about 700 meters. But by that time, the Habara were basically long gone. Way too far for a good release. They were up, 75 or 100 meters high, So she, finally ran out of gas out there. Not only ran out of gas, but I know that she knew that she was beaten and there's no sense, continuing the flight. So she broke off and started circling around in the air, and they stopped the car. I jumped out and hollered and swung the lure, and she started coming back. I was kind of impressed with that because I'd never long lured her. It was always lure flying. So I was happy to see that she instantly responded to the lure and came back real high and stooped down to the lure in a blinding speed, and then shot up real high in the air and turned and dropped back down to the lure. And in the meantime, here I was just sick to my stomach basically because the whole flight was blown. But anyway, especially when the driver got on the radio and told His Highness that she was beaten in the air, that was sick. That was very expensive, very painful experience for me. And later back at the camp, I hated to see him, but anyway, His Highness told me to take Farhan and place her in the big flight pen and to find a good male for breeding. That was the last hunt she was ever on. So, I thought about it last week and other times. I've learned that it's always good to look back at your failures and bad experiences and try to come up with, some silver lining somewhere. And so in this case, I think this disappointment was, it was well earned, but the better thing would have been that the bird didn't hunt, because as you'll see in a minute, there was more to the story. I'm going to bring up some of that again later, but the end result and the end experiences I had with Farhan for those years in the future were really valuable for the whole program.
Yeah. Well, and I remember whenever we did our first recording, I had asked you if there were any other experiences that you had where you met resistance or, had to face adversity with certain things and stuff. And I'm assuming that was definitely one of them. And, I know whenever we talked in the truck yesterday on the way to one of our hunts, one of the things I was hoping we would discuss more were circumstances like that, where you learned lessons and things like so. I appreciate you elaborating on one of those other circumstances, because I think that's a good example for people to hear, that they can apply to their own selves too.
Yeah, as far as looking back, and
sure.
Like when I'm flying a falcon and especially training one, I evaluate every day's flight at the end, and then I prepare for the next one going forward, because if your bird has to pass certain positive tests and performance levels, if you don't make it, or if something pops up, this is really bad, you have to start back at the pass someplace and go forward again. But anyway, yeah, that's valuable. And these kind of things where there were resistance, it would be unusual to run into resistance programs unless maybe your mother or somebody or your wife had objections. But
sure.
And I can understand, resistance from those Arab falconers, because they were, used to flying passage birds.
Mhm.
They didn't want to fly captive rays at all, and especially like this man that I described now, was involved in some other really resistant efforts, but also, I was an American falconer that came in there in a country where falconry is probably one of the most, if not the most important thing in their life. And certainly, just human nature, you don't want to see the new guy
Sure,
do
sure.
something different, But anyway, that was my goal, I didn't care,
Yeah.
I
Well,
tried to pave the way forward because it has a huge conservation payoff,
Well, and it's a good lesson in that, I mean, it's hard enough sometimes that we have to conquer our own egos, with certain things, and whenever you're trying to overcome adversity from other aspects of things, I mean, it never ends, but
Yeah, well, falconry is a humbling experience
it
to
is.
anybody.
It always. And just when we think we're done, we always get humbled by something else. But I mean, also, I mean, the hunting camp, that whole setup and that whole experience, I mean, it sounds interesting. I mean, would you mind expanding a little bit more about the atmosphere and the venue and stuff for that, or?
Yeah, I would like to. I wrote a book for my grandkids. It's just a privately printed book so that I could document some of my life experiences because they're interesting. And so one of the things that I didn't do in there was talk about the desert hunting camp. So it's a little daunting to describe them adequately because they're immense operations involving lots of people and movements. And so the whole subject is reminiscent of the oft-repeated accounts of the grand falconry back in the days of the kings, the emperors, and rulers of old. So the hunting camps were veritable tent cities teeming with hundreds of people set down in remote deserts. There would be 100 or more tents and caravans, and the vehicles and lorries would be more than that. The camps were laid out nicely, fitting the landscape ideally and perfectly positioned. The roads and pathways would be leveled by road graders, and the camp was powered by huge diesel generators with electric cables running everywhere. Well-positioned fluorescent lights were strategically placed for vehicles and pathways for pedestrian traffic. The lights and fittings for domestic needs in our tents were quickly prepared by using tent-ready multiple plug-in receptacle boards. Each tent had one. Local workers were hired to prepare the campsites and to erect the tents. The laborers prepared the tents for cold weather camping and for rain and so forth. And they included a dedicated sitting area with basically sheltered by local desert brush all around to provide windbreak and so forth, and privacy. We had a fire pit within those sheltered windbreak areas. There's a 25-gallon water dispenser with a spigot that provided hot water because there was a heating box underneath these big steel drums. Steel fired boxes were also available for use to be carried into the tent briefly in the morning and evening just to take the chill and cold off the morning and evening air in the tent. Other tents in the camp were arranged according to hierarchy and VIP status, for instance, friends and other VIP family members close by, and then finally vital services farther away, and finally in the far back you would have things like administration and security, and we also had always a military attachment from the host country. The store tents and trailers were centrally located, and they be several maybe big semi-truck trailers there associated with these stores, and you could get anything you wanted in there, like gloves, mangalas, perches, crayons, jesses, and anything, hoods. There are sprawling cooking shelters with specialized cooking kitchen tents in one area. So, for instance, there would be a salad tent and one that made rice, great big huge pots that you could sleep in if you wanted to. But those kind of things. And then there were food animal shelters for sheep, goats, cows, and camel that were going to be prepared for food, and with an abattoir located close by for processing the meat. There were people with logistics information like detailed maps, topo maps and things, and radio control. Also, the vehicular maintenance section with garages. They could fix flats and install new tires, drop a transmission, and provide other major work and repairs. The hunting cars were detailed nightly with to remove sand and dust and clean, and fitted with Kleenex and different things. The petroleum was filled from big tank trucks, both diesel and regular gasoline. All those cars would be ready to go in the morning with sacks full of candy and oranges and apples and bananas. So we had really important telecommunications, with satellite and radio communications available. Their doctors and nursing staff provided urgent care. They had all kinds of emergency equipment, standby ambulances ready, in some cases helicopters for air evacuation. Radio telemetry support became more important as the years went by. And importantly, we had mobile full-service showers and restroom facilities in trailers, usually a complete toilet and shower on each end, and 4 of them in one trailer in some cases. So anyway, that was pretty cool to be able to take a shower in the desert. And then you could also get a haircut or a beard trim, and you could get a back and Pakistani head massage all at the same time in the same setting, sometimes in your tent. One time I had a back massage by a small Pakistani boy. This just occurred to me, that walked up and down my back because I always had some kind of issue with my back. But while he was doing that, I had my hawking bag laid there, and I had I think it was an Uncle Henry knife in a scabbard attached to the shoulder strap, but it was attached on there with a falcon leash, just a remnants of an old one, and tied in a really, really tight knot. Somehow or other, he undid that knot and stole my knife. It was the best hunting knife I ever had. I mean, you couldn't hardly dull the blade of that knife. It was so good. I mean, razor sharp. Anyway, that happened on that. But anyway, those kind of things were available. You could always find a banker if you needed one. I mean, everything was there. You could get laundry done and so forth. And of course, the food was really fabulous for hunting. So at the heart of the camp, stood an impressive Majlis tent. It was meticulously prepared and very striking in its appearance. It had handcrafted, brightly colored applique panels on the inside of the tent, lining the walls, the ceiling, and on the exterior ceiling. Very beautiful, red, green, blue, and yellow, and so forth. These big panels, colorful panels. It could It created a real vivid atmosphere for the scene of the whole camp. Anyway, the Magus could seat at least 75 falconers or more. They had carpeted floors, cushions, sitting mats all around, and steel fireboxes burned, charcoal, and provided a cozy atmosphere. Outside, an attached brush-lined haditha, or windbreak sitting area, was for VIPs and falconers in the evening and morning, too. Again, there were sitting areas all around a large central fire. The seating was inviting and comfortable. Iconic silver coffee pots for Arabic gawa and kettles with camel milk, ginger milk, and water for za'atar, herb tea, red tea, and tea with milk were always sitting to the side of a log fire on beds of coal. These all maintained by the coffee boys, so to speak. The fire pit and the setting were fit for a king. In the evening and in the firelight, it would illuminate the faces of His Highness and the other sitting sheikhs and guests, and the 75 falconers sitting around the enclosure attentively facing His Highness and the VIPs. Their falcons would all be held on their left at knee height, some of them unhooded and preening, all perfectly tame and spirited. First one and then the other falconer would recount the day's hunt or their falcon's noteworthy performance. Some would deliver a poem, maybe, recounting a falconry tale of old. They were often humorous, mostly, while others would describe or comment on the story of the day. Many jokes and antics were displayed in a completely relaxed and friendly atmosphere. Outbursts of hilarious play among some of the actors would have the assembly laughing with glee. They were even hilarious to me, although I didn't understand a word of Arabic in the earlier days. Their mannerisms and gesticulations on display were enough for laughter, and I laughed heartily with the falconers. The hunts might last for weeks. For me and others, my team and other people in the base camp, we might wait that long just for the hunting parties to arrive at the camp. But when they did, we would be usually packing up and on the move almost immediately. They probably would hunt one day there, and then days later and miles away from there, we might learn that, again, His Highness had finished hunting in the area and that the order had been given to shift to a new location. Right away, the entire camp would start packing up their gear and materials, continuing until late at night. At the crack of dawn, the lorries assigned to that group would arrive at our tent or at the tents and start loading. Those who had a hunting car or Land Rover would also pack their cars with special equipment and personal gear. My falcon always rode between the front seats, carefully positioned among various pieces of personal gear. In the back would be luggage and boxes loaded on the bottom, fragile equipment and odd-sized items placed on top. Bedding and dress clothes were heaped on top, rounding out the big mound of material in the back. Pigeons and quail were carried in well-designed cordura shoebox-sized cages, which I would place at the rear. Binoculars and hawking bags were stashed for safety and not always at the ready. On the dash, a bunch of bananas, assorted fruits, and nuts, and cookies for snacks. Bottles of water were stashed here and there. Some would be given to desert inhabitants and children when encountered. Oranges, candy bars, and crackers and cookies always handed out. Everyone would be ready to move immediately when His Highness left for that day's hunt. The big Majlis tent would be the first one to fall, and then our laborers would start pulling our tent stakes, and the move was on. By mid-morning, everyone would be assembled. The camp director would lead the entourage, and a long caravan line would begin to move. Big, long line. One time I counted 100 lorries lined up. That didn't count people in cars. Slowly but steadily, we headed to parts unknown, moving across vast desert landscapes and rough mountainous terrain. The route was always very interesting to me. I mean, I loved it. New territory and new things to see. Natural hazards were always negotiated, and the terrain always had some to offer, especially complicated for some of the big caravans and other large vehicles. Two-track ruts were more common than cross-country excursions and four-wheel driving, but in some cases even the ruts were four-wheel driving, but two-track ruts were often unpleasant. They were meandering, intertwining ruts and rough stuff, and in some cases they were filled with powdery, fine dust. Those ruts, pounded by numerous vehicle tires, would explode like dust bombs when passed by, the infiltrating, blinding, and choking kind of dust. I learned quickly to wrap and tie my gathra Arab style so that it covered my hair, then around once, then over the top of my head, to then cross the front of my face like a mask. You've probably seen pictures of people like that, with eyes covered with sunglasses. Even in the worst places with the windows closed, the gathra would be brown by the end of the day. The caravan would stop every couple of hours for a rest and toilet break. Trips of 100 kilometers and more were common. Arriving at some raw desert location, we would plop down and await our lorries in the gravel and among the vegetation. The lorries were often trailing at the back of the caravan and would arrive late. Our setup was often completed in a semi-organized way after dark. My team and I often jumped in and assisted in putting up our tents to speed things up. Even so, we would not get to sleep until midnight. Nevertheless, the all-important cooks would have specially prepared meals ready to be served in the Majlis tent when His Highness and the hunters arrived. On those days, we would have started around 3 a.m, woke up, and then started, tearing our bed down and doing the different things. We would do that before the call to prayer even. And so by daylight, we were hopefully close to ready. The Falcon Hospital in Abu Dhabi was staffed by 11 people. I didn't mention much about the Falcon Hospital before, but we had 2 or 3 veterinarians, several vet technicians that we actually trained, as they were basically either unskilled or some cases had a little bit of education, but we had a laboratory technician and 3 or 4 falcon laborers. Of those, 1 veterinarian, 1 senior vet tech, and 3 or 4 falcon caretaker assistants would prepare for and join the president's hunting party abroad. In other words, my Falcon Hospital team. The field hospital consisted of a group of large handmade canvas tents like the others, supported by giant bamboo poles. 4 to 5 tents housed our hospital. 2 tents were set up as hospital clinic and convalescent housing. 1 tent was housed live food such as quail and live pigeons and so on, habara in some cases. The clinic was packed and shipped in steel trunks, Pelican equipment cases, and assorted wooden boxes and folding tackle boxes for tools and medications. Easily assembled exam tables were set up under exam lights. Under table shelves were stocked with topicals, injectables, syringes, and needles and sterile packs and other supplies. A mobile anesthetic machine with a vaporizer and oxygen at the head of the table. Other diagnostic equipment included digital X-ray, endoscopic instrumentation, microscopes for diagnostic hematology, parasitology, and occasional tissue biopsy, exfoliative cytology type tests. Laboratory supplies, tissue stains, and instrument sterilization completed the setup. Instrument sterilization, by the way, in pressure cookers. Emergency sterile surgery was a surgical gown and mask required. Well-organized surgical packs and instruments were available for cases such as trauma, eagle attacks, fighting injuries, removal of gastric foreign bodies, bone stabilization, endoscopic exam and treatment, and diagnostic for aspergillosis and ceratostipula cases. A feather bank and imping station were all used on the same table space and anesthesia setup. John Houlihan and I mentioned him before. He was an American from California and had been a technician with the Berrigan Fund, had trained our technicians to imp feathers as soon as they were hired. Most of them were Indians from the state of Kerala. There were quite a few of them are still now working in various falcon clinics and hospitals all around the Gulf, from Kuwait all the way to Abu Dhabi. They're artists at imping feathers, even tiny primary tips, and managing falcons under anesthesia, as well as other things that even veterinarians should be doing. They employed imping techniques using falcon feather splint material that we taught them, and replacements or broken feathers are joined with fine, flexible beading needles. Splints obtained from the molted tail and primary feathers are stripped from the shaft and stored for use. Excuse me. Splints of specific lengths were then fixed with super glue as bridges across the breaks. Finally, the splint ends are polished with a Dremel tool. Long flight feathers and tail feathers were imped using bamboo skewers, short pieces inserted into the shaft and fixed with 5-minute epoxy glue.
Quick question. How often did these big hunting excursions, how often did they happen over the course of a season?
With our team, I'm just speaking about Abu Dhabi. Mm-hmm. We hunted every year in Pakistan and Morocco first, because they took their young, partially trained. They would even be training birds when they got there to hunt the habara locally, and those birds were more likely to stay on the ground and fight, and not so apt to jump up way off ahead and try to fly away. So it was a perfect hunting situation with lots of habara there of that particular subspecies, and the weather was good, at that time of year, so it was cold and perfect. Then the next hunt could be short, small hunts in Abu Dhabi with the migrant habara population that would come there. They were basically private affairs for His Highness and his family. And then another long hunt in Pakistan, a final hunt, usually up until in January, maybe the second week in January. His Highness would always stop before the birds started to go into breeding, condition. But and then there were other less, populated hunts where they would take trips to maybe, now I can't think of the name of the country, Turkmenistan and places like that, to Lebanon occasionally, Syria, those kind of places where there were a big habar that would stay up there, and those birds were wild as the marsh hare, so to speak, and they gave them great hunting flights that were, long distance, and they love those kind of flights. That was basically the kind of operations we're talking about. But the first one and the second one too could be anywhere from, let's say, 150 maybe might be a low, and might probably closer to up to over 300 birds in Pakistan.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
But these are multiple sheikhs all getting together to hunt.
Sure.
So along the lines of, the imping, which was actually a big part of our service for the whole falconers, because, falconry in the desert, birds riding in the cars, fighting in desert brush and rocks, a lot of feather damage. When I was traveling with the chief falconer and the leadership team around the Moroccan desert for weeks on end, I imped feathers wherever we were, in the shade under acacia trees, in temporary living quarters, or in the open desert somewhere. On a few occasions, I imped feathers at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning before we went out hunting. In the back seat of a hunting car was someone holding a flashlight shining over my shoulder. I used low-dose rompin and ABBA cloth restraint for short-time chemical and physical restraint. Following a breakfast of maybe Moroccan flatbread, cream cheese, and honey, and hot tea and coffee, we were off hunting. Those team hunting and training trips were actually wild experiences in themselves. There were usually 8 of us in 4 cars and a pickup for supplies. We slept in the open desert soil if possible, near water sometimes when it was available in the wadi, so that we could bathe the birds. Once we took over an abandoned shepherd's hut for 3 weeks in mid-November. It was bitterly cold and occasionally sleeting and spitting snow there. In that location, I slept under a rocky outcrop on the wadi's edge, out of the wind, with my saker falcon by my side. That particular location, I might mention, is still very famous among the falconers of our team and some of their friends. It's referred to as Hotel Hosh, in other words, a hotel for sheep. And there was enough room for 5 or 6 people to sleep side by side in the previous little dwelling there. But then the falcons we had to keep in the side of the enclosure where sheep had been. And we had them blocked out in there on, of course, hooded, but the sheep droppings were probably like 6 inches deep in that place. But even more interesting than that, it was vivid in my memory where that place was, because for one thing, I was training a white gerfalcon that year, and I actually used that bird later on, and the only one I ever used to hawk short-eared owls. But anyway, I remember that bird well, and the cold and everything. But then later on, when I went back over there, finally after sometime around in 2006, that particular area then right behind the hill over in the next crease to the desert below became our primary training ground for hundreds of gerfalcons every year. And so I had quite a few opportunities to go visit the Hotel Hosh again, and other people would too, just for old time's sake. But anyway, needless to say, they were very primitive conditions. In fact, one year I slept under a car under one of the hunting cars in a torrential downpour with rivers of water running down both sides and some up to my side, so to speak. Very miserable night. But after that year, I said, look, because these people they were actually Bedouin type, people, even though some of them were younger. So I said, look, we've got to have a little tent for these kind of things. I mean, you can just make your life a lot better with a one-man tent. So they finally agreed, and I bought 12 one-man tents in the States and shipped them over there. And that was great. I mean, it was fun watching these people learn how to get in them and put them up and take them down. But they lasted at least a couple of years, and that was great. But anyway, I was talking about sleeping under caves and then in and out of the desert habitat in the Sahara, and in more dangerous country, I would walk out quite a ways away from the camp and find some little nesting area in a clump of trees or shrubs and sandy thickets, and maybe a wild mullein, the hunter's paper toilet paper type plant. It's common there. It's imported here, but anyway, I would sleep in there with my commando knife unsheathed and under my pillow, ready, because of several things. One, poison snakes and scorpions. In fact, one time I got stung 3 times on the back, and it was I had to wake up my leader, the chief falconer. I told him that a gob got me on the back. Well, a gob is the Arabic word for hawk. The word for a scorpion is agrab. So I woke him up at like 2:00 in the morning and told him that a gob got me 3 times in the back. But anyway, we got that straightened out. But I mean, my back, it palpated. I mean, or what do you call it when it
Pulsated,
yeah. With intense pain all night. It kept me awake the rest of the night. But anyway, for those reasons, I had my knife open. But also there were the desert Tuareg people that they wore purple or indigo colored head wraps and shaggy dress and everything, but they actually, in some cases, would come and attack a camp of falconers like that and take their guns and cars, and they had been known to frequently take people that are hostages, this kind of things for money. So anyway, those reasons. But I slipped off into the desert and those kind of places because the team I was with would often stay up late and laughing and talking loud and so forth. And I like to get out and get away from the kind of atmosphere that might draw somebody into the camp, although we had shotguns and other kinds of guns in the car, but it might not help me, and especially. So I think that was just an aside I wanted to mention. That slept under the car was quite a deal, but those are the kind of conditions I put up with because I wanted to,
Some pretty crazy conditions.
Anyway, I was talking about imping, back to the imping subject. I'm reminded of an incident recounted by John Houlihan, who was the technician. He was actually running the hospital while I was away in Morocco doing other things. But a friend of his brought in a nice peregrine to the hospital wanting some tail feathers inked in. I don't remember why, but she required most of the tail feathers, and he just decided to use a complete tail set from a cadaver peregrine and imp the whole tail, which he did. And of course, the results were perfect, and the bird had a brand new tail, looked like perfectly trapped passage peregrine. So the next morning, his friend returned to the hospital, according to John, with his bird, and his complaint and the account measured that he talked about were priceless. He had flown his peregrine from the top of one sand ridge to the top of another one several hundred yards away, across a sand flat. Almost immediately, tail feathers started falling out and spinning to the ground, one after the other, until all 12 were gone and the bird had just been able to fly to the point and land. John had forgotten to epoxy in the bamboo splints. Such were some of the consequences of a very hectic and busy falcon hospital, sometimes with almost 90, and sometimes we had over 90 falcons in the hospital under treatment, and 15 or 20 or more clients waiting in the waiting room, some with 10 or 15 birds. I mean, these are really, really busy times. We accepted all falcons for evaluation and treatment anytime they were brought to the field hospital, no matter what time of the day it was or whether we were ready to receive them or not. Falcons would be left in the camp for medical care during the day, and the evening admissions were always possible when the falconers came back from hunting. We might see like as few as 3, up to as many as 10 or 15 birds per day in the camp. Of course, when I was hunting, I would hunt all day and then come in and I would treat birds until late if I had to. I once treated close to 300 falcons. In fact, I think it was a few more than 300 in a large group gathering on our way from Karachi to a hunting camp. We'd stopped at a mid-trip rendezvous facility for the night. They called it the Falcon House. There were lots of mosquitoes in the yard, and virulent falcon pox was rampant in that part of Pakistan. The falcons were sitting crowded together with clouds of mosquitoes around their perches. I had prepared for this kind of event because of the fact that we had experienced these kind of epidemic, so to speak, outbreaks of very virulent pox in our falcons. So much virulence that some of them would develop wet pox, where it would migrate from the external skin to the inside of the mouth, and at that point they were unstoppable. There was no way to prevent it. It would cause their death. So my technician and I got busy, and we applied cutter insect repellent cream to the areas around each bird's nares and on the top of their feet and toes, and tarsi. So we completed that process again after dark and late. I mean, it was probably, I think, like 10 o'clock or something when we finished. But anyway, the second treatment, and the bird slept well and pretty much free of much of insect problem. But anyway, that is the kind of operation sometimes we got into in handling large numbers of birds.
So, I mean, out of curiosity, was there nothing else that you knew of or had access to that you could have put around the camp, like kind of environmentally in a way to help with the mosquito repellent issue, or anything that wouldn't necessarily also been, hazardous to the birds also?
No, not actually. At that point, in that location, there was nothing I could do because we were basically, it wasn't in downtown Karachi, but it was in the suburbs, and the mosquitoes were everywhere. And the people would crowd around the wall outside our house and, wanting to get handouts and things like that. And black kites were very common. I mean, they were just prolific, like flocks of blackbirds almost. And so the falconers would take pieces of quail out there and throw them up in the air, and the black kites were swooping down over the falcon house perimeter and over the birds and everything else. And so I don't have proof of it, but I'm pretty sure that the black kites were the source of the virus, and the mosquitoes were, the vectors. And so anyway, not only us, but everyone that went to Pakistan had these kind of problems. So when we got to the desert, there weren't any mosquitoes, and we didn't have that problem.
Right. Whole water issue.
Yeah. By the way, just thinking about His Highness, I guess, rented or leased an entire train. And when it was time to go to the desert camp, we all rushed the train like a mob and rushed inside it with our birds and everything else, fighting for a place, hopefully one where there was a sleeping bunk in that particular room in that car. And we rode all night in a train from Karachi up to the camp location. And that was interesting in itself. But anyway, then back to the camp. Most cases in the hunting camps were minor, but sometimes there would be accidents in the rough and wild desert. Chases in the car were hair-raising, could be, and they were rough, but I was worried about the falcons, but I would watch and they would be hanging on to the carpet with both feet, and just, I mean, they were immovable. They got used to that kind of, actually we trained birds in the cars way before time to go hunting. We started out early in their taming process and training process with rides in the car because they had to be capable of riding in a car no matter what. But you would see them put their wings out when we swerve one side or another to kind of brace themselves, but they did fine. They would kind of rough up their tail feathers a little bit, but otherwise they did great normally. But the routine medical issues were the bulk of of missions there, but fights with habara and occasional attacks by eagles, foxes, and hawks, and so forth were the most common trauma we would experience. So captured habara would not only fight with their feet, but also they were rough and tumble, hang-on exercises with crashing through weeds and rocks and things like that. So you had broken feathers and sometimes eye injuries, and we'd have maybe a corneal laceration or something, but they were still not too bad. But the eagle attacks they caused me the most trouble because some of them are like marathon suturing experiences that, were maybe put in 150 stitches on some birds to hold them together, but I never lost one. And one thing I mentioned here is that, because people probably here don't know that, but, so I got birds that had been attacked by eagles and they had gone ahead and fed on the bustard that they had caught. Maybe it wasn't an eagle, maybe it was a hawk, but anyway, they survived, but they had fed on a full crop, bulging full crop. I mean, to the point that no one would feed their bird quite that much. But anyway, I had a couple of those that came in with massive skin lacerations. And just for information, you can use ketamine and rompin, and they don't vomit. They maintain their crop through a long procedure of a couple of hours. So, I mean, I thought that was probably worth passing on. I mean, unlike, barbiturates or some other kind of anesthetic.
Sure, yeah.
But we had all kinds of eagles there, golden eagles, tawny eagles, Benelli's. Eagles are really dangerous. I mean, they're like goshawks with big wings. We had eagle owls, short-eared owls. Little owls were always plentiful in both Pakistan and Morocco. I think we were talking about yesterday, I once saw a little owl jump under a rock ledge and hide, so I stopped the car and snuck around to the side, snuck up on it and grabbed it by the toe underneath that ledge. And so I had it in my hand. I took it back to the camp and put jesses on it and picked out a hood that it would fit. And so when His Highness came back to the tent from hunting, that evening I stood there with the other falconers with their birds on their hands and my owl on mine. And when when we were standing there to greet His Highness, he walked up and all of a sudden he saw that owl sitting on my hand, and he stopped suddenly and turned and said, "What's that?" And then punched that little owl in the chest with his stick. I mean, he just barely tapped it, but kind of made it lean back a little bit. But then he kind of laughed and just turned in and walked on into the Majlis. But anyway, it reminds me of the good-natured attitude that His Highness had and his love for wildlife. And I guess, I learned later on that actually owls are kind of taboo because of some old wives' tale or something, or cultural
superstition type stuff.
Yeah. But anyway, I thought was pretty interesting. I took the owl home, though, to Abu Dhabi, and we kept him there, I think, 3 years. And the kids loved the little owl, and so did my wife. In fact, she still likes little owls. But the owl, unlike, I think, a gray horned owl or any other owl, this one adapted to captivity, and it was tame, actually. And so I could train it and fly it in the living room upstairs, during TV sessions. And we started letting the owl loose when it saw we had big geckos that would get in the house some way, and they would be running across the wall. And we had some flights with that bird taking big geckos off the wall and coming into the floor. But
sounds like fun.
I finally took him back to Pakistan and released him. So anyway, the desert habitats were pristine. They were fabulous, really, like the Thar Desert in Pakistan extended all the way to the Indian border. It was a refuge then, I don't know about now, but for a variety of threatened or endangered or rare wildlife, like they had some pretty good-sized groups of great Indian bustards. We had Indian gazelle and many eagle and raptor species. Cinereus or black vultures, Egyptian vultures were frequently seen, and I heard that there had been some white-backed vultures. I think they're pretty rare now. Also, lots of foxes and jerboas, Indian jerds and gerbils. There were numerous everywhere. Beautiful, beautiful, rich desert. Venomous snakes were around all the time. One time we camped, basically, well, I could tell we camped in the site where there were lots of Russell's vipers. I found that out when each place we would go, we'd hire local boys for camp help. And the man I had that year, he was really into things like, I remember now that he would come in with a scorpion, and he would actually have cut the tip of the stinger off so that it couldn't hurt you, and he'd carry it around and scare people with it. But one night I had just gotten there, and so he wanted to go with me to the supply store and get some pots and pans, something that we needed from the store. And it was at dusk, and so he went ahead of me, and I was just behind him, and I couldn't see very well. And all of a sudden, he stopped dead in his tracks, and I crashed into him in front. And I said, "What is it?" And so I don't remember the word he used. Arabic word was hanish, but whatever he exclaimed was different than that. But anyway, I quickly found out that it was a snake or something, and we didn't have a flashlight, which is amazing to me. I mean, that's the memorable part of it, other than the fact that it was a Russell's viper. But anyway, I ran hurriedly back to the tent and got a flashlight and came back. And we didn't see the snake in the pathway, but you could see the track where it was, and it went up in a jerboa hole and then stopped inside because he got down on his hands and knees and shined the light, and you could see it in there, So snakes are one of my interests, and I'd already handled Russell's vipers in Fort Worth when I worked for the zoo temporarily down there. So yeah, and there were several around that camp. I think it was basically like a den of Russell's vipers, but fortunately it was cool weather, so you didn't have that much problem with them. But we also had, I think, in that area they had Indian cobras, and then in Morocco we had black cobras and puff adders, horn vipers quite frequently. That the Arabs would see them, and they'd holler, "Snake, snake," and I'd go there, obviously, because I was interested. But then I would, probably unwise, but I'd pick it up, and they'd want to see the fangs, and I would show them the fangs, and then turn it loose. But one time I remembered another kind of funny thing. This in Pakistan, same thing. I was in my tent at the hospital there, and I heard my people running towards me saying, "Snake, snake, doctor, doctor, snake." And so I exited the tent in a hurry, and here came a group of Pakistani laborers. There's probably 7 or 8, all dressed in their Pakistani desert dress, and they were all thin and kind of skinny type people. But anyway, the tall leader of the group had a stick, and on the end of the stick was a string, and at the end of the string was a noose, and it had this, it was probably a something like a whip snake or a garter snake or something, cinched around the middle of the snake, and it was dangling there on the end of the string, and he was holding it out like a flag, so to speak, walking ahead of this group of people. So I think they told him to bring it to me, so he brought it up there, and when he did, my thought is I got to get it off of that string, because it's just strangled right in the middle. And so I got a hold of it. I mean, it didn't even try to bite me, and all these people gathered up around me, like 2 to 3 feet away, wanting to see what I was doing. So I worked, and I finally got that noose to slip, and I slipped it out of there, and then I turned it loose right in the group. I mean, it was hilarious to see them scattering in all directions. That's the kind of guy I was. I guess. So anyway, the grandeur of the camps surrounded by this expansive and pristine desert was an awesome experience for me, so much so that it had to be experienced over and over again to fully comprehend and appreciate everything that was going on, because it was, it was an awesome, multi-functioning city in the desert and tents, It was colorful, and it was a teeming celebration of falconry, which coalesced around the kind of scenes that harken back to the days of old when falconry was in its heyday. But now the grand master of the hunt was His Highness Sheikh Zayed. It's difficulties many years later to really conjure up all of those details again in my memory, but the awesome spectacle and experiences I had there are indelibly imprinted in my mind, and also in the minds of all the other people that were with me. I know I've talked to them many times about it later. But anyway, I was really so privileged, to have shared those hunts as a participant. I was quiet, but I was trusted, and I was an observer and a witness of the whole thing. And it's just hard to, to imagine the wealth of experience I had from that. Anyway, the desert camps were unlike anything that could be imagined outside of royalty, and I compare it like to Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan, those kind of hunts. To me, it often brought back those images that in documentary movies that I saw on Life with an Indian Prince, witnessed by the Craighead brothers. They were, very important in my early day falconry learning. The location was not too far from, in terms of distance and habitat, and also the local culture, from where we were there in the Thar Desert. The raucous call of hoodie crows and ever-present black kite circling in the sky above the palace were iconic. These, amid the colorful cultural backdrop of the Pakistani desert and food and so forth, fills my head in quiet moments. I also have vivid memories of my 8-year-old son, James, wearing Arab kandura, a red and white gatra expertly wrapped around his head, a walking stick in one hand, and a tiercel Barbary purse on his glove. I had picked James up at the local airport in Pakistan and as he disembarked from a Russian Ilyushin 76 strategic airlifter. James was accompanied by my Indian technician, and they were arriving from Abu Dhabi. His Highness had approved and invited James to the hunt, and he was spending his Christmas break with me. Later, he would associate with some of the father's sons and the falconers, sons of the falconers, who were also on school break as they traveled around the palace and in the desert camp. We spent that cold Christmas together in the Falcon Hospital tent with a 3-foot Christmas tree all decorated, lighted, and warming our tent. Quite a surprise to the falconers visiting the clinic because Christmas trees were unknown pretty much there. One day when exiting the Majlis, His Highness Sheikh Zayed came over to James, who was carrying his Barbary at the time, and asked, "What is your falcon's name?" "Skipper," James said, and then His Highness repeated, "Skipper?" seemingly surprised or amused by the strange name, but he then just smiled and stepped back into his waiting car. Such was the warm and personable touch by the president, and one that always characterized his character with dignity and charm.
It sounded like he had a pretty interesting sense of humor.
he had a wonderful sense of humor. Actually, now that you bring that up, so I had lived in a beautiful villa, big villa near the mangrove swamp area, not a swamp, but a mangrove area in the sea there. And it was great as long as the kids were young, because James was like 1 year old when we moved in there, so to speak. And then my daughter Amanda was born in the hospital there, Corniche Hospital. But anyway, as they got old enough to be in extracurricular activities, the American school was a long ways from there, basically in terms of traffic and time involved. And so by the time they were probably, I think James was probably 7 and Amanda 6 then, I guess, they started swimming, and there were other, after hour schools things that they needed to be at. And so Rebecca was having to drive back and forth some long distances and some trying traffic concerns and so forth. So anyway, finally, she said, "Look, we've got to move." And so I finally agreed, and I had to go to His Highness and ask him if I could move, because he had to improve everything that I did, and I had to meet with him often anyway. So I told the Chamberlain of the Presidential Court that we needed to move, which is a big deal, because it costs money and, upset routines and stuff. But so anyway, the Chamberlain of the Presidential Court explained it in detail. And so, of course, in Arabic, and so I couldn't really tell what he was saying, but I could tell he was talking about my problem. So when he got through, I remember His Highness just leaned back a little bit in his chair there, and he was sitting in a Majlis chair at the time, and he thought for, I would say, probably like 10 seconds, and then he leaned forward and said, "Okay, well then just move the American school close to the doctor." So that was his answer, and that was the end of the conversation. And then he laughed, But he was a wonderful guy. I loved the man. I mean, he was my kind of falconer, for sure. I mean, he was wonderful. I mean, very intelligent man, really an unbelievable leader, entrepreneur type guy. I mean, wonderful. Anyway, so where are we now?
Yeah. So, I guess now would be a good time also to ask then, because I forgot to ask earlier, as far as, skipping back a little bit to for Han again and finding a male for the breeding. Did you end up finding a male saker for breeding?
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad you brought that back up because I totally forgot about it now. Yeah. So as Highness had previously placed nesting boxes high on the side of that 30-meter high flight pen. It was actually designed by a German guy. But anyway, it was like, I think it was 50 meters in diameter, and that's 150 feet plus and 30 meters high. But anyway, I think there were 4 nest boxes up on the side with a hole in each end of the box for nesting. He was hoping, again, I mean, that's why he was saving these breeder type birds, that he would be able to breed birds someday. Anyway, he had told me, to find a good male. So, to that point, I mean, we had not found anything. I mean, there was no place to really look, actually, in my mind, because back in the 80s, captive breeding was basically not done anywhere. I think there might have been one in Bahrain with Charlie Schwartz, and then I didn't know that there was one in Saudi, but one day we got word that there was a possibility of one male saker or captive raised bird in Saudi Arabia. And that came from Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed's office. And so I went with him and his secretary and other leaders, and we traveled to Abha, Saudi Arabia, which is on the western side, close to the Red Sea, and met Prince Khalid Al Faisal, who was the patron of the Al Faisal Falcon Center. At that time, it was the largest breeding center in the Middle East. The breeder, I met him there, is Peter Whitehead. He was a famous author and notable figure from Great Britain. And they had quite a breeding complex there, and especially a hacking facility. It was made out of stone, and it was wonderfully prepared tower for hacking and trapping birds. It was perfect, and both places were perched on a huge canyon. I mean, I don't know how deep it was. It was probably at least 1,000 feet deep. I mean, a huge canyon that proceeded all the way west towards the Red Sea, up in the mountains. But anyway, I spent quite a bit of time talking to Prince Khalid about his facility there because he spoke perfect English. He was a true gentleman and very easy to talk to. And he told me that he loved these captive raised birds and that his favorite falcons were red-naped Juror cross birds, which that stuck in my mind too. And he told me some of the flights he had with them, but his professional falconers didn't like captive raised birds. They thought they were worthless, and they resisted him. I mean, various ways according to him, and basically he just got fed up with it. And so it sounded to me like, from what he was saying, that he would probably just close the facility, saying I think he did. But anyway, we took this one male, which in my opinion was a poor example. It would have been a poor breeder for a stud, but anyway, it's the only chance. only choice we had. So I took it and turned it loose in the flight pen, and it did fine. So the following year, one of my caretakers came and told me that Farhan was staying in one of the nest boxes for prolonged periods of time. So I didn't think too much about it, but I did, log that into my memory bank. And then a couple of days went by, and he came back to me and said, well, Farhan's staying in there, not coming out to eat, but once in a while it will come out and eat, but it goes right back in there. So that really got me interested. I went over there with him, and I told him to climb up the outside of the cage and peer into the box and see if he could see anything in there. And so when he did, he said, yes, there's 3 eggs in the box, which I was just thrilled, So in fact, Farhan incubated and hatched nestlings, 3 nestlings that year. And the next year she was transferred to a breeding project in the UK, where she lived for about 22 or 23 more years there and produced other falcons. I don't know to this day if they were superior or not, but the ones that she produced in Abu Dhabi, I thought were similar to the male myself. I mean, and I think that's true. But anyway, what's interesting to me is that when I took over this gerfalcon breeding project in Morocco, which needed some improvement, to say the least, one of the descendants of Farhan was still in that collection there. So that kind of brought the whole thing full circle to me. I mean, I went there the first year, 30 years later, here's an offspring, that I'm in touch with that was part of Farhan's lineage. One additional milestone I'd like to mention about Abu Dhabi and their progressive development was the internationally recognized conservation triumph in the breeding and rearing of thousands of habara in captivity. The conservation scope was broad, with initiatives involving multiple breeding programs of both species of habara in Asia and North Africa, and their release in protected habitats. The habara's recovery in the wild, supported by captive breeding, guarantees their continued huntable status, for sure in Morocco, and now becoming more so evident in Asia and Pakistan, so forth. This story also, though, highlights the conservation ethics and the captive breeding of falcons in the Arabian Peninsula. So the falcon breeding facility in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, where I worked, concentrates on breeding pure gerfalcons. When I got there, we had some gersakers and so forth, and peregrines. But anyway, now pure gers. At season's end, choice hunting falcons are selected by the criteria based on their size, conformation, color, hunting ability, behavior, and speed. At season's end, falconry birds are returned there and molted in familiar chambers or flight pens, but then transferred to chambers that are familiar. When they reach breeding age, most are paired in or near chambers from which they were raised. Thus, the life cycle of these falcons is a continuum within that context. Some of the developmental aspects of that program were highlighted in my first interview, primarily that of conditioning and flight pens, and it was be well worth going back and looking at that if you haven't seen it. But anyway, the rearing, training, conditioning, hunting, and molting of superior falcons is a never-ending cycle of excellence in this facility and for this sheikh. This is the conservation vision of the late President His Highness Sheikh Zayed. This and other captive breeding programs in the region, including that of many other raptor species, are huge conservation initiatives taking the pressure off wild falcons. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, President of the UAE, is furthering these goals.
Well, and would this be a good time to maybe talk a little bit more about that whole, initiative then? As far as, I mean, I know whenever we talked briefly about other things you wanted to cover in this, you really wanted to really highlight the Hubara effort and other aspects of that. So, I mean, if you want to talk a little bit more about that,
Sure.
it'd be a good time.
Yeah, you're right. That is one thing I totally left out. And once I realized that our podcast was finished, I was pretty disappointed because
That's how it always works.
it was the most important thing I had to say. But anyway, a longstanding cultural practice of Arab falconers involves these annual releases of wild trained falcons at season's end. They don't just keep them there for no reason. They'll keep some spotters and maybe some birds for breeding, but their practices were age old, practices. But after I got there, and not because I was there probably, but these releases became more scientific based, and His Highness actually formed this formal program of falcon release projects where they collected and assembled, you'd say, like redundant falconers from all over the place. They would be in late winter, early spring. They would be physically examined with a very detailed protocol. They were conditioned physically if they needed to more, and then they were eventually then transported to more northern latitudes and like, let's say, common migration pathways, and released, some with satellite transmitters and so forth, to follow them back to their natal habitat. It was a win-win for the conservation programs that are involved there, and they're still ongoing. I mean, every year. Of course, there are way fewer birds to release nowadays than before, but the Abu Dhabi Falcon Research Hospital was part and parcel to some of these conservation initiatives. I traveled on the release projects in some cases and always helped them install satellite transmitters on birds and these sort of things, and helped them actually condition some birds as well. So, in addition to providing modern Western veterinary medicine and health care for the falcons of the royal family and the citizens, we also assumed an educational function as falconry liaisons between Arab and American falconers. I had a big poster collage of photographs, both Western falconers in America, and all sorts of poses and activities alongside Arab falconers and their practice of falconry. And the falconers in the waiting room would look at these and get ideas. Like, I had pictures of birds on nest ledge, pictures of birds feeding babies, and these sort of things, all kinds of things that would help meld the two cultures together. And then we printed color brief summaries of falcon diseases and maladies, like bumblefoot and asper, air sac worms, and all kinds of things to just help educate the people. And then we also entertained them in the clinic when we were examining birds, and even doing like bumblefoot surgery. I've had people come in and wear a gown and watch, certainly with doing things like examining birds for asper. They would want to see what I was looking at, so they would become more familiar, but probably also just to be sure that I was telling them the truth. I don't know. But anyway, we employed these educational opportunities whenever we could. The Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Raptor Conservation Fund is unique in the Arab world in making major contributions to global initiatives in the conservation of raptors of many species, including the saker, falcon, and eagles, hawks, and vultures of all kinds. Major conservation programs in Mongolia involving Saker falcons are making strides in preserving and enhancing the survival of the Saker. Many artificial nesting platforms have been erected for Sakers. There they're using, I think, steel barrels mounted on posts, but they're being routinely used for raising young and producing more Saker falcons. Electrocution protection installed on power poles is providing safe perching places. That's a major, expansive program that's still ongoing. Because they have poorly designed electrical poles and connections in that country. Another program and the Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Conservation Program is young boys in Abu Dhabi can join the Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed School of Physiognomy. That means studying the features and characteristics of the desert. They learned about handling, training, and hunting with falcons and the characteristics of the desert habitats and quarry. Camping and hunting excursions at the school give them hands-on experience, furthering the proper pursuit of the cultural art and time away in the desert from modern life. There they handle and can fly falcons and participate in hunting trips around the area. The conservation of falcon and prey base and other natural resources is being instilled in the youth of the country. These initiatives are part of the fabric which binds the national pride in the Emirates. All falconers and citizens love and honor the late Sheikh Zayed, the founding father, nation builder, the conservationist, a falconer, and a visionary leader. Young Emiratis have a great heritage awaiting them in the knowledge and the practice.
Whenever we were in between going in and out of hunting spots yesterday, we talked more specifically about like the hubara. I asked, some questions about that. And I thought that might be worth sharing for others that are curious or possibly curious about that too, because as I mentioned when we were driving yesterday, there's so many different things that we here in the States hear about, what's actually reality versus speculation and all that. And particularly referring to like the hubara, you've got pretty good insight on whether or not, a lot of those programs have become truly successful in reintroducing, good, healthy population numbers back into the wild for hubara and stuff like that. Would you mind expounding on that a little bit?
No, I will, because I actually was employed. I had two jobs at one time. The Environmental Wildlife and Research Group funded through the Abu Dhabi the captive breeding of not only hubara but also the Falcon Project that I worked for. When I originally went there, like 25, 30 years before, I could see maybe the hubara disappearing. I mean, sometimes I would envision seeing the last track being blown over by sand, that kind of vision. I could just see that. I mean, the people there are unbelievable hunters. I mean, there's no way to stop them from hunting, and they were going to continue, I felt like, maybe until they were all gone. But that didn't happen, fortunately, because the team that I was with, one of our leaders, the main leader there, was instrumental in scientific-based inquiry into captive breeding, behavior, environmental needs of hubara, and he was able to capture a very smart Frenchman who was working on that project, and they learned what the Habar needed to breed in captivity. So that particular program then expanded into massive bird production. It evolved through a whole series of things like the sizes of cages, the location of them, what was absolutely needed, what would be detrimental, and then a very hardworking, intelligent American from Montana, John Seabury, put all of his effort into incubation technology. I met John one time. I just now thought about it. I was in somewhere in northern Morocco and camped out in a camp. I guess we had maybe, I don't know, probably three big tents, three big Majlis tents, and or not Majlis, but anyway, big tents, and in a crease in the mountains, kind of away from quite a ways from the road, like half a mile from the road. And I had my hospital, Falcon Hospital there, and one day I was in there working on something, and the tent door flopped open, and there was a guy standing there, blonde-headed, had a woolly-looking beard. He wore a Moroccan striped condura with the pointed hood behind it, and wearing sandals made out of leather and old tire treads. Guy looked like a beggar, or something. And he said, "Are you Dr. Riddle?" I mean, in English, And I said, "Yeah." So it was John Seabury. He was, let's see, I can't remember things anymore, but he was in the Peace Corps, and he was there doing whatever Peace Corps people do, but he tracked us down some way and knew I was a falconer there. And so, man, we hit it off real well. And then he walked away. I never saw him again for years. He was there walking. He didn't have a car or anything. But then when he popped up later, he had managed, he was an educated person, very sharp, but he had managed to grasp the whole subject of captive incubation of eggs of all kinds. And he was extremely progressive and capable individual. And he built this incubation facility into a huge, almost like NASA type project between him and his boss, this Frenchman. It was an unbelievable place. I've been through it, and it was just it'd be hard to describe the place. But anyway, they started turning out hundreds and hundreds and then thousands of eggs. Well, in the meantime, John was also involved in all kinds of aspects, but just besides the incubation, he was involved in the rearing, and then certainly had ideas involved about the breeding. And so they researched, pioneered quite a few things in terms of what size cage they should be in. The first ones were like maybe let's say 2 meters wide and 3 meters long, maybe, and they were all lined up in row after row after row after row on top of asphalt, which I thought was amazing. I mean, you can imagine pairs of birds living on top of asphalt in a hot environment like Morocco. It was higher elevation, but still it got real hot in the summer. But anyway, that was what they were in. And then they were imprinting birds and using dummy Habara, and they were collecting semen and going through rigorous semen collection with using Moroccan help that were trained to do that kind of work. And not only were they doing it, but they were doing all kinds of genetics work and careful selection and breeding. I mean, it's a massive scientific project. But what I was getting ready to say is they kept narrowing down the size of the cage until now. I don't know exactly what the dimensions of the cages are, but I would say this desk would probably be like 2 cages stacked side by side, like 24 by 30 or something, and they're laying eggs in there. They have so many eggs that they have to throw some away because they just can't hatch them all, and they don't need them all. So using this as the prototype, then it's being multiplied in different places in the Gulf and in other countries in the Middle East of both subspecies. They've been very careful not to ever contaminate either population. So the wild Habara, I mean, I have the most experience with them in Morocco because I was there all the time. They're breeding everywhere, all over the place. They've released them there in controlled environments. I think His Highness's hunting and conservation project there was 40,000 square kilometers. I mean, that massive sized place. I mean, 7 hours to drive from one end to the other. And their release projects are not just turn them all loose and see what happens. I mean, they employ hundreds of wildlife policemen, and each one is positioned on the top, overlooking thousands of acres of Habara habitat that a person could slip in and hunt on. So they employ at least 100 game wardens. These people established on the top of little one-room towers and all these places, watching for illegal hunters and that sort of thing. And then big tracts of land are reserved for nesting and breeding, totally off limits for any hunting of any kind. There's other real good area that's reserved for hunting, and it's augmented sometimes by captive raised birds, but seldom in that one place I'm thinking about, because the His Highness has guests there, and I mean, they're wild birds. But the point is that these birds released in the release areas are migrating in short distances all over the country, over into Algeria. Lots of birds nesting there, raising young, southern Sahara areas in Morocco. So, I mean, they're flourishing. I mean, it's probably more there now than it ever have been. And the same thing is going on in the Middle East, all over the place, where they have, and like there's a new project in Qatar and Abu Dhabi, they have projects there as well. And then on up into, can't think of the name of the countries right now, but not only breeding falcons, but Habara as well, So the Falcon project, though, is for sakers, totally saker oriented, to release sakers. So anyway, those kind of things are, very expensive and detailed projects managed by scientists and falconers and wildlife type people.
Well, it's good to hear then that all that's paying off, because that sounds like a pretty incredibly intensive labor.
Very, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm glad that there was an interest taken in that, and that the right people, wanted to see that initiative be successful, because I can't imagine the amount of money and just resources that takes, but it's mind-boggling to see because I don't know, there are probably 100 people, 100 Moroccans, and then French scientists. There were all kinds of
botanists and people that study insects. And I mean, so the habara is the kind of bird that consumes not over green stuff, but also insect material and
entomologists.
Entomologists and behaviorists of all kinds. I mean, it was veterinarians and,
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. That's very incredible. But, well, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit ago, but, as far as like just, different falconers, from here in the States and stuff that had the opportunity to kind of work with some of the falconers from Abu Dhabi and stuff. I mean, is that something that you kind of want to mention too, or talk about?
Yeah, I would like to, to tie it together because obviously American falconers they have knowledge and also hardworking. And I think I mentioned Charlie Schwartz before in Bahrain, and then Dr. David Rempel in Dubai. I haven't really included anything in Dubai because I don't have much experience there, if any, involving their practice of falconry. So mine is pretty much limited to experiences with American scientists, veterinarians, or in some cases other other professions. But anyway, American falconers who liaison with the Abu Dhabi falconers are pretty numerous, but there are some of them that I know very well. In fact, Dr. Tom Cade is the one who gave them my name when I first went there, but he was back there a number of different times. I've saw him there, and I've seen him here. I've spent the time on the Colville River with him. We discussed a lot of things, but he was very honored. He was a very honored guest in Abu Dhabi, and had lots to say and add to their programs. Over the years, there were other collaborative efforts through Dr. Cade and the Peregrine Fund back and forth. Kent Carney, who's the founder of the Archives of Falconry, he was very encouraging to their efforts to help come up with a falconry, a combined falconry exhibit in Boise. He actually, with me, we worked together to bring in that Arab tent into their archives and establish the Sheikh Zayed Arab Falconry Heritage Wing there. Kent was really he's a great guy, and very instrumental in that whole, that whole project. Frank Bond is another one. He was a good friend of mine before I went over there, and then I met him over there several occasions. He was the IAF president one time, and he consulted on the Falcon Passport CITES program, which is very desperately needed there because it got approval of passport handling of wild-caught falcons and help, perpetuate the sport or guarantee it. He was also involved in that UNESCO acknowledgement of falconry as an intangible cultural heritage. And Frank was really a good, he was a gentleman to for sure. And he was respected in many countries, and certainly by the people in Abu Dhabi. Another one or two is Dave Marshall and Robert Bagley. They were very helpful and respected visitors in Abu Dhabi. I saw them many times in Morocco and Abu Dhabi at the hunting camps. They would come and spend time. We hunted together. I'd always remember several things, like in hunting cars, I would just listen. I had nothing to say about telemetry, but except that I liked it. But they had brainstorming sessions in the car with one of our really intelligent leaders on the Abu Dhabi side, And there were many different iterations of their development of their radio telemetry systems, and we tried out a number of them in our team. But anyway, that was and still is a very powerful presence in the Middle East, not only there, but Saudi and other places. As a falconer from Oklahoma, I'm fortunate to have had these associations with falconers from many countries, especially those of Abu Dhabi, and the fantastic experiences I had with them in Abu Dhabi and Pakistan, Morocco, and other places. So falconry is a brotherhood of like-minded devotees. My wife, Rebecca, who you just met a minute ago, she would say that, quote, half-wild, passionate hunters with birds, innovative, relentless, and single-minded, with a vocabulary mostly limited to flying and catching things, and endless stories told by wild swings of hands and arms. Always ready to meet up with falconers in the field to hunt, and then to return home way after dark. That's her summary, but she's tolerated it, thank God. Be that as it may, American falconers have joined forces with Arab falconers in different ways, and they are passionate falconers, to say the least. Falconers on both sides of the ocean will continue to associate through international conservation initiatives, captive breeding efforts, with avian veterinarians, and then falcon festivals and hunting events around the globe. The Shakeside wing of the Archives of Falconry, located in Boise, is a flagship example of the strong ties that unite falconers. These are the ties that bind us together. So I feel that this, unless you have other questions, this brings my falconry journey and story to a natural conclusion. Inspired years ago by the 1920 National Geographic article on falconry, the art of kings, those distant dreams unexpectedly became reality for me. For Han, an Altai falcon and the president's favorite of a lifetime, was a surprising and fitting nice touch. In my last few years of employment in Abu Dhabi, I was able to realize a 30-year dream hawking sand grouse in Morocco. My accommodation was in view of daily black-bellied sand grouse flights. The first indication of their presence would be characteristic chattering, chuckling, or warble, quickly fading off in the distance as they flew overhead. I would just look up and catch the blur of their wings and their formation shooting across the sky like little rockets. Their simultaneous warbling and chattering songs in flight quickly became a constant temptation to me to get Tac-Tac, my Gyr peregrine, in the mix. I raised that bird in captivity there at that project and hacked him for, I think, 16 days in the flight pen, a controlled hack, but I had to take him out of there because jerkins were trying to catch him and eat him. I mean, he was fleeing his life for his life. And in fact, I waited to like 4 o'clock until almost dark before he came into the capture room, because I think he was just sneaking in there to get food, hoping no one would be after him. But anyway, I trapped him up there and just intended to train him on the lure and fly him occasionally, but because I was trying to avoid taking time away from the real serious project I had there. But anyway, occasionally those sand grouse would drop into land in the rich desert habitat surrounding my accommodation. I could see them out my back window. I had sliding glass windows there and on a veranda going outside, and there they would be out there maybe 100 feet away, and then they would take off warbling like they do. So I resisted those temptations, and I buried my head in my work, concentrating on the all-important projects at hand in the breeding facility. When I could resist no longer, my Tiercel and me pivoted. Now, part of that was my employer was actually responsible for that, because he knew that I had a bird that I actually trained that bird to wait on just using the lure, no pigeons at all. And it was flying really nice. I mean, it would go up 400 or 500 feet just using the lure and walking across the desert. I would reward it by tossing out a feathered lure. So my boss is the one that planned these sand grouse invitationals. And so he wanted the Arab, actually the best falconer we had in our team, he wanted him to compete with the French and the other people that were visiting, because there were no Arabs in the group. I mean, no one had a bird trained for sand grouse, and they didn't want one, if you were from Abu Dhabi. But so anyway, I said, well, yeah, you can take this bird, take it. It's probably ready. I said, all I'd have to do would be to fly to, 3 or 4 or 5 pigeons, and it would be ready, knowing it was going to be served something to hunt, So he said, okay, good. So I drove down to the hunt. It was I think a 5-hour drive one way down there to where this final hunt was going to be taking place. And I took 5 pigeons with me, and I don't remember exactly how many. I think I was there 3 days ahead, but maybe not. But anyway, I used 4 of them. They were good racers, good homers. And I served him, I don't know, maybe 2 in one day. I don't remember. But anyway, I used 4 pigeons. And so the day that most of our team showed up, they flew their birds, and they said, "Doctor, get your bird, and let's see you release a pigeon for it." And I said, okay. And so I had that one homer left, but they chose their homer. They picked one up out of their box and said, "Here, fly this one." So I said, okay, we'll see what happens. I have no idea, because I hadn't been flying him real hard at pigeons, four pigeons, and they were impeded actually, So my bird always flew last, and so at the last one there, I put the bird up and walked out, I don't know, maybe 150 or 200 yards, and tossed this fully flighted homer. And the bird, I mean, from about 500 came down and stooped and missed. And then the chase went right over our group, who was plopped down there to do our training that day, and flew probably half a mile in one direction, and then came back at an angle and passed by us again and disappeared going in that direction in the far distance. I thought, oh, heck, man, he was close behind it, but I was sure he'd got beat. So then the falconers took off in the chase, like they always do. And by the time I got back to the car, they were long gone. So I've caught up with them then finally. And so one of them come running back up to me, and he said, "Oh, it didn't make it, Doctor, it's gone." I said, "Oh, heck, I was afraid of that." And then he just started laughing. We drove back over there. I said, "Where is he?" He said, "It's over here." So I went over there, and there he was on the pigeon, So this falconer I told you about, the really good one in our team, wanted it then. I said, okay, well, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's ready to go, because 500 feet is a respectable height, to get it on sand grouse. And so they kept it there, and they had 3 flights, and they told me it almost caught one. I had to go back to the facility and go back to work, but they said it almost caught one, and it was really, really good. That's in their opinion. So with that kind of information, that's when I pivoted. And because I was back home, that bird was ready to try. All you had to do was turn it loose. I mean, if I left the gate of our compound, I could just turn right and I was in huntable territory immediately, And so I started, and I don't remember when that was. It would have been like, I think about the 1st of December, probably, because they would have gone back for National Day on the 3rd. So that was about the 1st of December. So then I think it was about, I don't remember, around the 21st or something of January, it cold cocked a sand grouse in a stoop from a nice pitch, and my start was underway. So anyway, that sums up that part of the talk that I'm talking about. But we started hunting, and I never looked back. Neither did little tack because I hunted him hard for 5 years, probably harder than you should. But I mean, by that time I was in my late 70s. I ended up about 80 years old the last time I flew him on a hunt, and my motto was hunt, hunt, hunt. That's it. So anyway, that's I'm unbelievably thankful God gave me these experiences, and that's I don't know. I'm just an unusual kind of guy. My wife said, and so did my sister. I mean, that fulfilled a lifelong dream. I'm not the kind of guy that's after money or anything else.
Well, there's something definitely to be said about, I think most people at some point in life figure out that experiences and all these different things and like truly living life are more important than just having money.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm right there with you on that. And, on that note, I'm just so thankful, I guess. This is now the second time that you've given me almost 3 hours of your life and time. And, yeah, I know you're finding that hard to believe. I'm going to make a confession. I chuckled a little bit whenever you initially told me you really wanted to try and keep this nice and concise and narrowed down to about an hour and a half. I was reading through all these notes and stuff, and I was sitting there thinking, it's going to be longer than that. But I didn't want to mention anything like that whenever we were recording because everything was flowing so well and stuff. But now that this has kind of come to its conclusion, thank you again for giving me another 3 hours of your time and for being such a trooper on this. The amount of work and prep that you put in to getting all of these memories kind of back in some kind of semblance of order and being willing to share all this. I mean, it's a big deal. So, I mean, I'm very appreciative in acknowledging that, this is not something that is, number one, natural to you. And I as I've said a million times over, I value people's time and just their willingness to give me that time more than anything. So thank you, again, so much for this.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate getting to know you, especially our trips yesterday. And so all I can say is I've been where you've been a lot of times, and God bless you on your journey ahead. And so, I mean, hang in there. I can experience a lot of things through what you've said to me. And so,
yeah. Anyway. Well, you're most welcome, and I feel very privileged to be able to have shared some of this time with you. And I'm happy that this is kind of like both of our magnum opuses, so to speak. With I know you're happy that this is going to be, and I hope that this is kind of a nice conclusion for you and a nice summary in all this that you can feel proud to at least go ahead and put a.
So I guess I would say it has been enjoyable, because otherwise I wouldn't, when you get to my age, I'm 84 now, almost 85. So they say, well, you just sit back in your rocking chair, but you can't, at least me, I can't remember all this stuff. I mean, once in a while, another story will pop into my mind just like today, but unless you really concentrate on the past, you just forget it. I mean, it's hard to dig it out, and so I got to enjoy it again.
Well, and that's one thing that I mentioned that I hope if nothing else, aside from the other aspects that are a challenge, for doing this kind of stuff, I hope if nothing else, it was nice being able to just reminisce on some fond and happy
Sure.
memories, and I know that the wider community is going to appreciate this for a long time, and is going to get some really good stuff out of it. So,
Okay, good.
I mean, that's always been my goal with this too. I wasn't ever in this for money and stuff. And as I was telling you yesterday, unfortunately, I'm going to have to throw in the towel on it because I just simply can't afford to keep self-funding this anymore, at least not for the foreseeable future. But I really was very happy to be able to still carve out the time and a little bit of money out of my budget to make this trip still happen, because I wanted this to be kind of the exclamation point, so to speak, and my ultimate mission and goal in helping to contribute back to what we do also with making, because I mean, episodes like yours are really the main reason why I really wanted to continue this kind of mission, because there's just so many. Once people are gone, they're gone, and their stories are gone with them. And I always wanted to, once I got into this, I felt like it was this was a way that I could help kind of preserve that. So
I'd like to comment on that. That brings back my boss in Abu Dhabi. I had several, but I mean, obviously the president on down. But one of them was a man like you, very intelligent, and he was a deep thinker, and he felt the same way. Of course, he was involved in nation building efforts there, where the Bedouin way of life was going by the wayside. I got there towards the end of that, but I mean, he knew that, okay, these people have wonderful, wonderful stories and memories and things to recount about life in Abu Dhabi, 50 years ago or more. And wonderful stories like I've heard them talk about things like one Bedouin I talked to said he would come home from hunting in the morning and he would just release his saker in the front yard and go to work wherever he went. And the bird would stay there the rest of the day out just loose. Then he would come home in the evening and pick it up or whatever, The stories like that, I mean, you never think about it unless, all of a sudden somebody said it, So all kinds of stories that recount the past. So he invested in large groups of recordings and capturing people's stories and family life and things like that, because he knew that it was going to be gone soon, because it's a modern place now.
just like so many other aspects in what we do is something so small and so niche that such a small amount of people in the world ultimately care about. If somebody doesn't do it, nobody is gonna. Yeah, it seems like such a common sense statement, but it takes a village, and somebody's got to be willing to do some of these things, or else we're gonna lose a lot of stuff. And whether that's contributing back to somehow or another in some way, it doesn't matter. It needs to happen. Whether it's our organizations, our state clubs, equipment making, recordings, whatever. If somebody doesn't keep doing these things, I mean, we're going to lose it. So
it's already happening. And for instance, I've I started flying prairie chickens. When was that? It was like 1960, I believe, or 61. But in those days, we didn't have telemetry. We flew passage peregrines. That's all I flew for a long time. And but we flew them and kept them through the molt without telemetry. Well, if you didn't know, I mean, we sealed pigeons every time we went hawking. I would carry 3 sealed pigeons in my bag, so did everybody else. And there are those flyways, especially with passage birds earlier on, where, especially if you go to a place like the Flint Hills in Kansas and Oklahoma and northern Osage County, and places where very, very wild habitat, and you could take a bird that was commonly flown at ducks in Oklahoma City in that area or Stillwater, take them to Osage County, and they would fly totally different. I mean, as soon as you released them, it's just like you plugged in electricity or something to them, and they were wild and flying like crazy. And they would rake away sometimes, or, back in those days, I mean, there are all kinds of things that could go wrong. And I mean, there are many times where a peregrine is flying is almost out of sight and half a mile away and going away. And you'd start throwing sealed pigeons up. One of them would usually, or more, would take off and fly up high good. And then here they would come back, you'd get them back. So, I mean, nowadays, no one, I guess people that might carry a sealed pigeon, I don't know. For a long time, I carried pigeons no matter what in my bag. I don't carry them anymore. But anyway, things like that, and the numbers of prairie chickens, I would see like 300 greater prairie chickens fly into a field, to eat corn. You don't see I don't think you see those big flocks anymore, certainly not in Oklahoma. And other things of interest along those lines. I mean, that once they're gone, they're gone. You can't bring them forward. So anyway, those are interesting things, and I hope you will keep on. I'll do what I can to encourage you in whatever way.
Well, I appreciate it. I think we all as falconers end up needing at least a break from time to time, and we have to prioritize our life from time to time, and that's where I'm at right now. And this is something I don't want to give up forever, but I know I also can't keep paying for it completely out of my own pocket, especially right now with so many different things I have to catch up on. We'll see what happens, but one way or another, I'm very happy that at least for now, this is I've been able to do one more in-person recording with another really amazing person, falconer, that and once again, just really, I feel really privileged to be able to kind of bring their stories to everybody and get to hear them firsthand, sitting across a desk in an office, which I will happily now give you back along with your life again. And we'll keep in touch. I'm very happy to be able to do this, and hopefully, if nothing else, maybe you'll get to see some more, maybe at least 1 or 2 more snipe flights at some point this weekend, if everybody doesn't disband and go their own ways. So
I would like to, but I never turned down a flight. But then I've got to keep my wife happy. Today we're going to shop for furniture. Tomorrow's church day. I don't know whether she'll let me off or not, but we might.
Well, she at least lets you have 2 days anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So,
well, anyway, it's been fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, pleasure's been all mine, Ken. And I guess now I can officially say signing off for at least a while, maybe forever, but I don't know. Either way, it's been a pleasure, everyone. This is John Munier with Falconry Chronicles, and on behalf of myself and Dr. Ken Riddle, happy hawking, and we'll see y'all sometime down the road.